in case you're curious. Okay, if everyone wants to grab a seat, get comfortable. We have Jennifer Potter from the Amarillo. The Community and Suicide Prevention Training. If y'all have any questions, feel free to ask her. You play your questions, but we are very excited that she is here.
I have a couple of flyers that I'm hoping everybody will have just for some really good information, and then there's also some here that just talks about, it's optional, just some things that may fit for you personally, you could give to somebody else, or whatever fits for you. Kind of having like some nostalgia right now, because I feel like I'm like home for the holidays right now, coming back here, so I love this place. I miss you guys so much. Yes, so one thing that I do need everybody to take, though, is going to be, there's like an evaluation at the very end. I am grant-based, and so one way that we continue our funding is to provide training to the community. So if you guys wouldn't mind, do not put your name on it. It will remain anonymous, but if everybody could just fill one out for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and stay right here. I kind of usually present all over the place, but I know that Dana's trying to record also. Again, my name is Jennifer Potter. I'm with Family Support Services with a program that's called Lost Team. It's local outreach to suicide survivors. And I'll go more detail into the program later on. But one thing that Dana had asked was that you guys have some sort of suicide prevention training. And I will say, I know that this is one of the required things for being a caregiver in foster care, but you will use this at some point in your life. Just personally, I have had to troubleshoot with people for at least twice now for my own personal life. And then also I've had several calls, especially moving into this position too, for people that's calling and they just need help. And so I know that this seems like it's one of those required things, but it is really real life. I will say suicide is something that is not racist, it is not ageist, it's not sexist. Everybody is affected by suicide in some way, and it doesn't discriminate. So why are we here today? Can I just, besides being required, what are y'all's opinions on this? Why is suicide prevention important?
Learn more to help prevent it, see the signs.
Yeah, to see signs today.
We work with a lot of kids that have gone through all kinds of trauma, so this kind of training is beneficial for us to be able to help them work through the rest.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, we were all experiencing some sort of event that is traumatic. And so just knowing that there are resources out there, and again, if this affects somebody that is personally to you, professionally, the kids that you care of, it may even be some random stranger that walks into church one day. That was me at one point. I'm not the random stranger, but I had somebody come in and they needed help immediately. And everybody else walked away, turned, don't make eye contact. And so for you to be that person that says, like, hey, I know a little bit about this and I can see where you're coming from a little bit, it's really helpful. And you might be able to save a life. So for today, there's going to be three kind of main, this is Nikki, by the way. Nikki's interning with us. So I'm going to introduce her. There's three kind of points that I want to, or parts of this training that I really want to focus on. There's prevention, so I do want you guys to be aware of our statistics and facts worldwide, as well as specific for Amarillo too. Some warning signs and risk factors to look out And then, like, so when you have somebody that is showing any of these warning signs or is at risk, what do we do to help them if they come to us instead of just saying, oh, okay, I'm sorry, and then walk off? What do you do about it? And then also the post-mention part. And this is where my whole job has come in. And it's specifically post-mention is after suicide has occurred. How do you help somebody cope with the aftermath of it? So one thing I wanted to say too, language is a big part. Mental health has a lot of stigma to it, and it's something that we are working really, really hard to break. So how you approach the topic of suicide is really important. First off, people don't want to talk about it. It's one of those things that if it happens, you don't know what to say. You're afraid that you're going to offend somebody or anything like that. So this is something that it's really important to me too, especially working with professionals, because when you start using a certain terminology or a phrase, it's really, really hard to break. So some of the no-no phrases are, we don't say committed suicide. That is something, when you commit a crime, right? And I will tell you, from a suicide survivor or somebody that has lost somebody to suicide, when you tell them that their loved one has committed a crime by losing their life, it's really offensive to them. And I'll get into more detail about that, but we don't say committed suicide. Instead, we say they died by suicide. You can also say they suicided, and just leaving it as that. A failed attempt, that is something that a fail means you failed at something, right? So if you tried to take your life and you're still here today, that's not a fail, but you're still here, right? So we don't ever want to place that blame either. Successful suicide is a big no. Suicide is never successful. That person is not here with us today. Nothing about them is successful. A suicide gesture could be somebody that attempts suicide. We don't say that they did a suicide gesture. You can claim it as it is. Attempted suicide, cutting, all that other different things. They can do that way. The Manipulation Act. This is another one that I think is used, and I won't say that there isn't times that suicide isn't used for manipulation. However, it's extremely rare. And saying, well, they're just trying to be manipulative. Well, that almost takes it as a challenge. And if you don't take them seriously the first time, what's going to mean that they're going to not go fully through it afterwards? Trigger. This was something that I recently learned. If you have somebody that dies by gunshot wound, when you call it a trigger for somebody, it's actually triggering. And so instead we use the word activated. So at any time too, I will say, I know that there are some people that have been affected by suicide. It's way more common than what we all talk about. So if anything in here activates you or you feel like that you have to take a break, please feel free to do so. Okay, I know that this is very real. So some other things that we can say instead though is instead of people that have attempted suicide, you could say, or people that manipulate, you can say individuals with a lived experience. Another way to say this is a peer. So, peer support programs, it's a lived experience. Do y'all have any questions about that so far? How hard is it to change our language from this? Hard. Yeah. I have just a little video to show you guys. I hope it works. Let's try it. You might have to control click.
We've lost far too many lives. We lost far too many lives.
David, do you have any suggestions on how to make this go?
John.
John?
Sarah.
Yes.
You're still on.
I'm charging by the hour. Jennifer, pull up the.
Does that work?
There.
Okay, okay.
Good.
Just your presence.
John has to this day.
Since 1937, over 2,000 people have died from Golden Gate Bridge. I feel lucky to be every single day. For the thousands that have died off the Golden Gate Bridge, I am of the 1% who have survived. So I was born on drugs, I'm pretty sure. And then I bounced around home. Nobody wanted to keep me because I was sick. And I got lucky. I landed in the home with Patrick and Deborah Hines. I had a great childhood. I thought growing up that everything's gonna be crazy. And then at 17, it all came crashing. You can imagine feeling that everyone around you is out to get you, trying to hurt you, and trying to kill you. And you believe that to be the truth. From the extreme paranoia, I exhibit symptoms of mania. From the mania came the hallucinations of thought vision. And so with that in my early story, I just spiraled out of control. I vividly remember writing my suicide. People don't get it. I thought I was a burden to everyone who loved me. Because that's what my brain told me, because that's how powerful your brain is. I got off the bus. I walked slowly down the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. People drove by me, walked by me, and a woman approached me, and she said, "Do you know your cake?" And I picked it. She said that, she walked away. In that moment, I just said, nobody cares. The reality was that everybody cared. Just couldn't see it. I ran forward, using my two hands. I catapulted myself in a free fall. What I'm about to say is the exact same thing that 19 Golden Gate Bridge jump survivors have also said. The millisecond my hands off the rail, it was an instant regret. And I remember thinking, no one's going to know that I didn't want to die. In 4 seconds, I fell 75 miles an hour, 25 stories, and I hit the water. I was in the most physical pain I ever experienced. I have ever experienced. The Coast Guard was amazing. He was just so freaked out I was alive. He just dove in and brought me up. And I said, "Do you know people with blood as part of their life?" And I said, "No, I don't know." That put his hand on my forehead. I said, "Give you a miracle." My father took one step into the hospital and I looked up at him and I said, "Dad, I'm sorry." He said, "No, kid, I'm sorry." And if you think about it, both of our immediate reactions were guilt. Guilt that didn't belong to either of us. And even though I didn't die, it caused people a great deal of grief. Just the day of my attempt still sits within me today. I asked my father if he still feared my death by suicide. He said, every time the phone goes off, his first inclination is Kevin alive. I had an impact on my dad. So after the jump, the road to recovery was pretty long. I had 7 psych ward stays for the next 11 years. I still have all the symptoms I've had. Any depression, psychosis, hallucinations, all that's still there. I just don't know how to be it. I built a support network over these years of treatment so that I wouldn't be fighting this alone. So that it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay not to ask for support. So the families who live with the losses of loved ones, they didn't do that to hurt you or destroy your life. They took their life because they were struggling with a great deal of emotional mental pain. Suicide, mental illness, and addiction are the only diseases that we blame the person for perpetually. But people die from suicide just like they die from any other organ disease. Today, no matter,
I just wanted to I'm gonna pause that right there. So from that video, what were some of the things that really stuck out to you? What was the most impactful?
That he instantly regretted it.
What about when he was in the middle of his moment, like the day of that he was going to take his life? What did he talk about?
The overwhelming feeling that nobody cares.
And that he actually didn't want to die, but, you know, he was going to go through with that.
He just felt like that nobody cared. This was the only option. Yeah. Has anybody heard him speak in person and heard his full story? He's incredible.
Not in person, but I've watched another video with his story.
Do you remember more detail about the day when he woke up and kind of talked about that? He talked about, though, how basically he reached out to different people in different ways without saying, you know, today I'm going to kill myself. But he reached out in different ways and felt like he was ignored. Nobody asked the question. Nobody came to him. And so he just assumed nobody cares about me and I'm such a burden. So that is really impactful for me. I did hear him speak, and he's a pretty phenomenal person with quite a surviving story. So why suicide? And this is often a question that I get, you know, after it has happened, is why does this happen? There are different risk factors that people are more prone to suicide. However, I said at the very beginning, nobody is immune to it, right? But if there's a family history of suicide, and I'll get back into that with my presentation on my program a little bit more. A history of maltreatment, or if they witness violence, if they had previous suicide attempts, mental health disorders, especially depression, alcohol and substance abuse, cultural and religious beliefs, if they are of a culture that feels like that suicide is a noble solution of a personal dilemma, that is a big factor also. Isolation, feeling like they're cut off, barriers to accessing mental health treatment. What do y'all, when I say that, what do y'all feel like I mean by that?
Low-income families.
Income. What else? What are some other barriers? Why do people not see stigma? Cultural belief. Yeah. Where they think I'm not bad enough yet, right? And so it just continues to spiral.
But isn't there, I think there's also, it's been a few years back, I know a person that tried to get mental health when she was an adult, and there wasn't any room, it was told like she couldn't get treatment. Like, so she either had to not get treatment or she had to go to Logic or something like that, because there isn't I guess unless you made it an attempt and someone caught it and then you're put in the bill or whatever, she couldn't get treatment. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. She was like, you know, this and
Our daughter a few months ago, so she wasn't crazy enough for her.
I will say, like, I tried to get into counseling for 3 months, and it took me that long, and I was seen as a favor. There is a shortage of counselors. I mean, they are booked completely. We need good counselors, and we need people that specialize in different areas. As far as help goes, there are resources. It just may not be typical counseling. There are hotlines and different resources also. But yeah, there is a shortage of counselors for sure.
Texas is
Yeah.
ranked dead last in mental health of all the other states. So it's not that the resources aren't here, it's just the demand for it is so much larger than the staff, than the counselors, than the mental health professionals. So, I mean, it is there, it's just the wait list is ridiculously long.
It is. Maybe now we're actually just talking about that the other day. Physical illness and chronic pain is another one. If they've gone to several doctors for something, they can't figure out why they hurt. Why, and they keep saying, no, all the test results are normal, like everything's normal. Like they just feel like this is never gonna end. They don't feel listened to. So that's also a risk factor. Access to lethal methods. This is another one. Guns don't kill people, but having access to them, it just makes you more at risk. Same thing for medications and things like that also. Is there anything else that you can think of as risk factors that I didn't mention? I'm not perfect at this. So.
I think it's already kind of up there, but just the people we chose to put on the thing where they seem to have life going. I don't know that it's necessarily like a stigma towards it, that they don't fit, they don't feel like they fit. They shouldn't have to have help because I'm a funny guy, or the successful one, or I have all these things going for me, so I shouldn't have to. It doesn't fit who I am. That's not who I am. That really maybe, like it might be their own view of like how people see them, so they instead of getting help for me.
Yes, and I'm so glad you picked up on that because I was hoping somebody would. When I first did this PowerPoint, I had a picture of a child in the corner. It's like the gray tones, and they have their arms crossed and everything like this. And then I thought, you know what? This isn't an accurate picture of who dies by suicide. And it is, if depression and suicide risk and everything was that easy to pick up on, as somebody crying in a corner, then of course we would be able to help them a little bit more. But it affects. Yes.
That's the reason why I'm telling this back at 13 reasons why I don't let my girls watch it.
Yeah.
Because she blames everybody. She never, those people didn't, okay, there's one back, but, or maybe two, but those people didn't see it because she didn't. The guy that wrote it, that lady didn't know who why he was there. She thought he was there sightseeing just like she was, And so it's that same like, it's not obvious, and so he can say, I tried to talk to these people, but unless we give the person that's hearing the words say, so that we're aware of. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, you're completely right. I want you to hold on to that about the 13 reasons why, because I'm going to get to that at the very end too. You want to come up here?
No.
You're like, we got this.
I have another that was completely healthy mentally. She watched that show and made her feel really sad and not healthy. I haven't really watched the show.
I think also a group that's overlooked is narcissists, because everybody thinks they think so much of themselves, but they're narcissists and stuff, that they're really at risk for actually committing suicide. My husband we all called him a narcissist, and we thought, well, he would never kill himself. He loves himself too much. He's the most important person in the world. And it was, and so he loves himself. So I think that population, and plus they make you mad, and so, it's
you don't care if they're hurting. You suck, man.
No, that's it.
It's hard to have that support system
Yes.
when you're market longer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. You guys are good. This is one thing that I do want to point out. So, and again, I'm going to bounce back and forth because I really deal with the post-vention part. So suicide has already happened, and I'm there to help the families and the loved ones. That's really what my job is. But, and I'll get to it also, but post-vention is prevention. And one thing that I often hear from the family is, if I only would have done this, this wouldn't have happened. And they feel like it was just this one instant that has caused a suicide death. And we really have to work with them and explore that there's not, asking them one time if they're thinking about killing themselves isn't all of a sudden going to be like, you know what, all of a sudden I am, and that's the end. And, and it may be that it was a breakup, but it wasn't necessarily just the breakup that was causing them to feel like they have to die. It is a whole collection of these different layers, basically. And so there's factors on there that biologically, you know, does your brain have the right chemicals in it that's keeping you mentally healthy, emotionally healthy? Psychologically, same thing. The familial, do you have the support system socially? How is suicide talked about, seen in your community? The cultural piece of it is a really big piece also. So there's a lot of different factors for why people die by suicide. It's not just a one-event thing. So signs and symptoms, and we've already talked some about this, but if they're threatening to hurt or kill themselves or wanting to hurt or kill others, they're looking for ways to have access to firearms, or pills, or other means like that. That's definitely something to look for. They're talking or writing about suicide, death, or just acting out of the ordinary. So if they have increased substance use, they just say that they have no reason to live anymore, no reason to go on, no purpose in life. Anxiety, they're really agitated, they're unable to sleep or sleeping all the time. So kind of those extreme behaviors. If they're withdrawing from their friends, and so the things that they loved most, they're now all of a sudden they're not doing these activities. They're acting reckless or engaging in risky behaviors, or they're gambling, giving away all their money, giving all their possessions away, things like that. Dramatic mood changes, and so it could be that they're perfectly happy, and then somebody cuts them off in the parking lot, and all of a sudden they're outside their car, they're throwing stuff at this other person or something, and that's not their typical behavior. That's something to look into. Something's going on. And then, like I said, they're seeking long-term care of pets. That's a big one. If their dog is really the only reason it's keeping them alive, or that they feel, and yet they're giving their dog away, or somebody that they really, really love, that's something to look into also. Stockpiling, medications, increase, we already talked about this. Okay, double this up, sorry. One thing, you don't have to go back, but one thing on the other one is if they're all of a sudden talking about their will, or they're inquiring about life insurance plans, or bank account stuff, making sure they have all of that. And again, if it's something that's not for end of life, or they have no real reason to be doing this, like for instance, my husband was a firefighter, and then with the job that I have also, death is very real to us. And so we've had those discussions about that. But for somebody that wasn't exposed to all of this all at once, if I all of a sudden came home and was talking about a will and all these things just out of nowhere, my husband might start to worry about me a little bit more. I just wanted to put like a scenario in there and see what you guys thought. So this is Carrie. Carrie's a successful student. She's loved by teachers and peers. She's involved in several extracurricular activities, and she has honors, and she's just like the star student. Even though she is this ideal student at school, at home she really struggles. She has no support. Her only parent is constantly criticizing her. Her grades aren't high enough. Her room is never clean enough. She is never dressed appropriately in her parents' eyes, or her mom's eyes. Before long, she decides that this isn't a good home, and so she starts couch surfing. Her mom kicks her out. She doesn't like her defiant behaviors, and so all of a sudden Carrie's finally homeless. And at the beginning of the year, she was just glowing, full of energy, and by mid-year, she stopped wearing makeup. She's making statements about just giving up. She's working as hard as she can at her job and at school, but she's just lost all hope for her situation's gonna change. She's never sure where she's gonna sleep that night. And suicide seems like the only option. How does that feel to you guys? I mean, is that something that you could see as a reality for somebody that's going through? All right, let's go to the next one. This is Joe. Joe's been an assistant for several years. His father died by suicide, and his mom just spiraled after. She started using drugs and alcohol for her pain, and she became neglectful. Joe was removed from his home after several CPS reports. He lived with his grandmother, who was very loving to him, but she died, and he was then placed in foster care. Joe bounced from home to home until being placed in a group home outside of his hometown. His brother, Mark, was the only family he had left. Mark went to live with an aunt that was not a biological aunt to Joe. She was not willing to take Joe in. He's begun to withdraw and sees no sense in making friends since I can't depend on anyone. He's often angry, defiant, and yells at staff and other peers. Do you feel like Joe is at risk for suicide? What are some of the warning signs that we talked about? Or let's start, what are some of the risk factors Joe has?
Here's a child that was he's a boy, he's under the age of 25.
Have you had this training?
No, this is one guy, but the boys that are under 25, the brain's not there, the brain is impulsivity.
We'll get to that too.
Okay.
Yeah, you're on the roll, yes. What are some other risk factors that Joe has?
It's the feeling of rejection. So it's kind of already got that ingrained in his head.
That has like, you're talking about the family or friend support, you know, not having money to fall back.
Big losses also lost to other in that whole situation.
It may be that his grandmother was the only person he felt like he could rely on and support and open up to and had everything. And now she's gone. And so he said, we don't have anybody else anymore. So what is the impact of suicide? Every 40 seconds, a person loses their life to suicide. It is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. It is the second leading cause of death for those between ages 10 to 34. Male to female death is 3.5 times to 1. And so males typically die by suicide more often than females. However, male to female suicide attempt is 1 to 3. So the males usually die by suicide, the females are more likely to attempt. Do you guys have kind of a hypothesis for why that is?
Appearances.
Appearance.
Are you talking about like the male being more than the female?
Mhm.
Like
For-
appearance, sometimes for the persona. I just know people who have suicided in the past, they felt like they had nowhere else to go or no other choice because they felt like they're the man and they're supposed to have it together and then
Yeah.
they didn't and they
Can't make it do more rather than certain like it happens, it causes more death. Like if you use a gun, if you jump off a bridge versus like.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why females are more likely to attempt, but males are actually to die. It's actually evening out over the years, though.
I heard one time too that females are more thoughtful. We are about not wishing a mess about it, about not wishing a mess when it's really a kind that would not be trauma, like a mess.
Yes.
Whereas like a male would be like I you know, I wonder what's like, you know what I'm saying? Like if you're worried about cleaning a mess and you're going to make it, you know, do something that's not, you know.
So the survival rate for an overdose is much higher than it is for a gunshot incident, for instance. And so that's why females are more likely to attempt, because a lot of times they use less lethal means in the meantime, yeah, which guys do not. Firearms do account for over half of the deaths by suicide. In 2017, 10.6 million American adults seriously thought about suicide. 3.2 million made a plan, and 1.4 million attempted. That was one attempt every 27 seconds. Rates of suicide in minority groups have doubled within the last 5 years. And this was something when I was working, when I'm working with some families that they said, you know, I didn't know that he was going through depression. They said, this was a quote, only white people go through depression. So again, it's that stigma piece to it. I was in a training where they talked about Black suicide and how that was just unheard of years ago. And yet that is now, it's become the second leading cause of death also. And so it's impacting more people than really what we realize. And even though suicide, the numbers are lowering, one thing that was said in that training is we're still not there. Our numbers are getting lower, but then when we have specific minority groups, the rate is increasing. That's an issue that we need to look at, and that needs to be our focus also. So some myths versus reality. Suicide only affects individuals with a mental illness diagnosis. People with mental illnesses are dangerous. You guys don't know that, right? The truth is 90% of people who die by suicide do have a mental illness diagnosis. However, less than 44% of these, about 44% of these did not seek mental health resources within the past year prior to their death. And again, we talked about those, the why, the financial, the stigma. Maybe they've tried it before. Maybe they tried individual counseling and that's not what they needed. It didn't work for them. Maybe they tried medication. They did 3 different types and it made them feel lousy. And so medication is not an option, and all these different things they talk about. Once a person is suicidal, there's nothing that can be done to change his or her mind. What do you guys think about that?
Like I even said, you hope that lady on the bridge,
What was he wanting?
Somebody to
He just wanted somebody to say something. He even said, I didn't want to die. I just didn't feel like there was another option. Suicidal ideation is often short-term and situational. Intervention can lead to successful fulfilled life. This is why they have those crisis lines, because they want somebody to call and they start identifying different ways, different purposes for why you're here today, and try and talk them out of that situation. That this is what you're going through right now is just a short-term instance. If you die, you're gone forever. Most suicides happen without warning. False. Warning signs are most often shown to trusted individuals. Knowing these warning signs may prevent suicide. I will say though, working in this area that I do, sometimes there are not things that you pick up. And so that's some things that I have to really work with the families with, is that, yeah, of course, and even the ones that show warning signs, if you didn't know what to look for, I mean, of course, after it's happened, you say, well, now I should have known. But you just did the best that you could in the moment too. Suicide is selfish act for cowards. Anyone can pull themselves up if they really wanted to. How often do we hear that? I will say the most significant instance that I had, I actually lost a friend to suicide, and it was a little brother to somebody, a family I was really close to. And I remember the instant I got the call when his name was Aaron, when Aaron had died. And I attended his funeral, and I was only 19 at the time. Didn't know any of this stuff. Wasn't involved with any type of suicide prevention or anything. I just know that Aaron was somebody that was extremely loved, supported, had a wonderful family, was a great kid, did awesome in school. Socially, he was a favorite, and this didn't make sense at all. And I remember the pastor sitting up there talking about how stupid, selfish, and all these different things and adjectives that he was calling for me and my friend. And I remember being so distraught because that's not the Aaron that I knew. So I don't believe that it's a selfish act. I really feel like that people who go through this feel like there's no way out. Cancer is the leading cause of disability in the U.S. Did you guys know that that is not the case? It is actually neuropsychiatric disorders, so mental disorders, behavior disorders, actually the leading cause of disability. This picture right here, I like to post also, because 1 in 5 people experience a mental health challenge in their life. So if you look at this family, they look well functioning and everything like that, right? And people may not know that the husband who works full time, has 2 beautiful kids, 3 3 kids.
That's why, and he only has 2 of them, he doesn't know where the third one is.
That's right, yeah. Having 4 kids, sometimes I worry too. I tell people all the time, like, it's not my job why I go to counseling. It's because of my family and my kids. But this is a situation that is, they're all heartbreaking, but for me, these are the ones that really, really hit hard, is that it's a stay-at-home mom who's got little ones, and she completely relies on her husband and doesn't know that her husband's struggling. And now he's just died with suicide, and she has to figure out how to pick up the pieces. And there was nothing that stuck out to her. Like, this has been the case that has really gotten to me the most. So, protective factors against suicide. What do you guys realize about this picture? It's what? It is. It's the same things that they talked about for some of the reasons for suicide, right? They can also be used as protective factors as well. So cultural beliefs, religious and spiritual beliefs about life, purpose, and about suicide. So, what is your purpose in life? Having that cultural idea of that also. Socially, if you have support systems, if you feel belonging, economic stability is definitely a big one. The financial stress, it can get to people. Activity, engagement. So if you're engaged in something that you love, things like that. Familial, if you have consistency, healthy routine, you feel that belonging, and you have a sense of identity. Psychological, if you have coping strategies, emotional control, you have high self-esteem, and you have a sense of purpose. And biological, there is a chemical component that comes to emotions. Healthy nutrition, physical exercise, and health. These are all protective factors against suicide. So, okay, we just talked about the what ifs basically, but then I wanted to really hone into what's the intervention piece. So now I've given you all of the things to look for and everything, but what to do if somebody comes to you or you were worried that they are at risk of suicide. You have to approach them with empathy and being genuine in your concern. And so if you approach somebody and they're sitting in the corner crying and then you go, what's wrong with you? Like, is that gonna help? No. And what if somebody says like, I just don't feel like that there's any reason to live anymore. I lost the one person that just really meant everything to me. I don't know what I'm gonna do later. I don't feel I can get at anything. I'm just done. And then you go, bless your heart. Okay. And then you walk off. Probably not the best, right? So really approach and say, hey, tell me about what you're going through. What is it that you mean you don't have purpose? Tell me about this. And really genuinely care. Be direct with your questions. This one, you have to ask, and it's really uncomfortable. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Do you have a plan to kill yourself? And I've asked this with somebody, and they've laughed at me. They said, no, I'm just venting to you. And I just responded to it, well, those were really serious comments, and if something happened to you, I would have so regretted not asking you. And again, they just showed that it cared. And it was super awkward, I will be upfront. But they actually came to me later and said, hey, I really appreciate you checking on me like that. That meant a lot. So be direct. Don't say, are you thinking about harming yourself? Because that can be different things. That can be like, well, not really, because I'm in so much pain right now that I don't feel like there's anything else I can do that's gonna hurt more. There was actually a counselor that talks about he made that mistake, and he asked a kid in a session, like, are you thinking about harming yourself? And the kid said, no, it's not gonna harm. And then later on, he took his life. And he's very, very big on saying, I should have said, are you thinking about killing yourself?
So we're saying both, we're not assuming.
Are you thinking about killing yourself, or are you having thoughts of suicide? And it can be a two-part.
Yeah,
I'll let you guys handle that policy-wise.
Joanne, we have to say it, Nicole, like you have to say both, right? Right?
Yes.
Yes.
You need to ask if they're-
We have to ask, are we gonna go sit or, figure out supper, or we can go say, I still agree that you should ask the other one, but you're not just leaving that one. So I see that, we also have to make sure we're not. Okay, just make sure.
Okay, I think for the suicide piece of it, if you're asking about suicide, let's put
Versus the
something.
fact that you
Yes.
can't just say harm yourself.
Yes, exactly. So listen to them without judgment, take their words seriously and with care. And so it may be that they're talking about how they just broke up with their love of their life and they're never going to find anybody else, and it was the best 2 weeks of their life. And they just don't, they've never been in a serious relationship like this. And the love was so strong. And he gave, he was everything. But if you came and you laughed at them, they're not going to talk to you about the other stuff also, right? And for them, it may be that this is the hardest thing that they have gone through. So just taking them seriously, listening with empathy piece. Help them think of reasons to live and how to keep themselves safe. And this is a really big one. Say, hey, do you have a family member that you would be willing to talk to? Who are you really close to? Do you have, your counselor? It seems you're really, really close to your counselor. How about if we get them involved with this? Is that something that you'd be willing to do? And to try and encourage them to be a part of their plan to keep safe is a big, big plus, if you will. And then it can even be, and I know you guys do this already, but for the time being, I really think that we need to not have razors around, or just kind of planning out how to keep them safe. And you can talk to Joanne, John, the supervisors about that more. Now get them help. So if they're in immediate need, don't ever hesitate to call 911. There are CIT officers that are available. That's crisis intervention team. They are specifically trained in suicide prevention, awareness, mental health. And I know a lot of people, they freak out when they see somebody in uniform come to their door and they think, I'm automatically going to be taken to the pavilion and I'm going to be locked up against my will. And that really isn't the case. There is criteria to go through where they have to do emergency detention, is what they call it, and things like that. But just to have somebody to talk to and a resource is really, really important. Contact their counselor. That's a big one. If they're already connected with somebody they feel safe to, please get them to talk to them immediately. There is a National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's 24 hours. There's even a text option, so you can text it if you don't feel like speaking to somebody. And it's just a confidential line to do exactly what we're talking about here. So if you don't feel confident in what you can do, you can text that line, you can call that line also. And then have yourself trained in suicide prevention and mental health. I will say, I had all these different trainings and everything when I took this job. I did grief support and everything. And until I really dove into this and had to do this for myself, that was the biggest learning piece for me. But if I didn't have all this background information, I wouldn't have been able to walk through. I wouldn't have been able to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? When they had somebody that said, I drive by that cemetery and I just think how wonderful and pleasant it would be that day. And just, it would all go away. And for me to say, that's a really serious comment, and I'm really concerned about you. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And then they laughed at me, like, okay, but that was serious. So, but if I didn't have all this training, I wouldn't have known what to say for them. And then there's some other resources, and of course, family support services. We have counselors, we have different support groups and things like that also. I did give you guys a flyer for our trauma-informed yoga therapy. She's actually a trained trauma certified yoga instructor. And so that goes for anybody that wants to. I think it is for adults, it's 17 and older, isn't it? Yeah. So some of the kiddos can't go, even though I would love to make that happen. But we've all experienced some hardships in our lives, so it's free of charge. Just letting you guys know that that's out there. Okay, what questions do you have on the prevention side? Do you want me to break?
I'm serious, like, when you go out and get it, you had no food. I mean, we just experienced it this week. The kid that lives here and nobody can discuss that. Like, they had no, I mean, he had a lot of risk factors, but all around, I'm just saying, like, what do you do? How do we prevent it? Not just for our kids, but for people that we care about. How do we make sure that it doesn't happen because they're not saying any allegation, they're not saying anything that tells you. You know what I'm saying? They might have risk factors, but you're not showing any. Yeah, there's no outward.
Yeah. I have opinions about that, and I think it's based more on my job and kind of what I've seen. You know, there's programs that are titled Zero Suicide and things like that. Is it a reality that it's not going to happen? I can't say that that's ever going to be the case. I think if we do our best and we try everything possible, we check in on people, we support them as best as we can, we try and get them help. We've done everything that we can. Responsibility, we are all responsible for our own actions. I think we can try and be there for people as much as possible, though. If you listen to actually Robin Williams, some of his stand-up comedy, there's a couple where he talks about, he makes fun of like his mental state. And so it could have been if somebody would have picked up on, hey, you're talking about this a lot. And I don't know if he was getting help. Maybe he was seeing a counselor. Maybe, you know, we don't know the story behind that. Kate Spade, it talks about how she was bipolar. And so when you get in those states, if you don't have the help and everything, it's really hard to pull yourself out of there. That doesn't answer your question at all, but I think we can just do the best that we can by getting the training and checking up on people each time. And not be afraid to ask. Yeah, the stigma piece of it, like I'm very open about going to counseling. I've thought it for a long, long time. And I got to a point where I'm driving in the morning and my anxiety was so bad from construction, taking my daughter to school, that I was having 4 panic attacks a week. And so that's when I finally said, I've got to do something about this. Something isn't right. And even some of the people that I'm very close to, they said, you cannot talk about going to counseling. You are a professional in this field. If they find out that you're going to counseling, they are not going to take you seriously. Are you kidding? Like, what are we telling people? And so I think being open about that, and it's okay to need support. And so changing that stigma is a big piece of it. Do y'all need a break for a minute? Or? Yeah, okay, let's do a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to talk about the post-tension part, which is really my program.
Here they are. Is there any?
No, it's probably about a 10-minute drive. Not too bad. Plus the next boss.
I don't know what's in the eye. It's just gonna have
Why were you not absent during the period yesterday? I skipped.
Really?
More explanation. These seniors. Yeah.
Then it had something to do with poetry.
She got a production crush.
Not good all night long.
Your sister,
Really?
cousin. Yeah, well, she's not me. Rejected. Oh my gosh.
I'm good. About all my students for work.
I bet sure was.
How would I know? He doesn't know I'm sick. You see, poor guy couldn't even get to his life. Love him to death. It's not his, dates are not his name. Someone has to.
So cute. That's kind of an issue up here.
Yeah.
For a lot of the.
I've seen his name on stuff, but I've never met him. What is he like?
It's on my Oh, yeah, it's so
And so, when I graduated, wasn't accredited, so I had to back. Oh, wow. That's every year for accreditation. So that was awesome. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, there were next thing you know, I worked for a long time. Yeah, she's got
You have to find out what you can do to others, because it's not like, I mean, I was born in 1983, so it's and I mean, the day that I realized I had to change something was something not to go see my youngest for
Pumpkin chud cheesecake. Little chud cheesecake. Can you make that for me? I mean, hate me so much. Okay, the only literal difference is there's cardamom in it. The only thing that makes it chai is it has a little cardamom.
There's a picture on it.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started because I would love to have you guys out here in the next 40 minutes if possible. I'm gonna go fast, okay? We're gonna go ahead and get started so I can get you guys out of here as soon as possible. Next, I'm going to talk about, which we've already talked about the prevention part, the intervention part, and I know you guys have policies in place too. I want to make sure that you understand whatever I just talked about. If there is a specific policy that you guys have to follow, please make sure you do that first. My stuff does not trump what you guys already do, which is probably what I should have said at the beginning, Cody. But so make sure you check with Joanne, John, so that you know as far as licensing goes and your home policies, what you need to do if somebody if you're ever concerned about a kid or a coworker or anything like that, okay? So my program has started. There's kind of three main governing bodies. So kind of the background of my story, or the story of how the LOST team started, because we just implemented our active response team December of last year. So it's still very new. There's only about 50 LOST teams across the nation. It is a nationwide program that we're trying to adopt more and more people to take on. So basically what happened was, I talked about Aaron Williamson beforehand. Aaron died 2008, and so his parents are very well known, they're well off, they were involved with the community, and the suicide that happened really struck them because it wasn't what you would feel like as the typical suicide case. And so it was really shocking to a lot of people. Aaron was a senior at Amarillo High, so as you can imagine, there were a lot of kids, church members, the school faculty, a lot of people were affected by his death. And Sarah Williamson, his mom, talks about that at the very beginning, they were just flooded with all the support and they got everything that they needed. And then after the funeral service, which I remember being there, and there were people standing in the aisles, and we flooded this ginormous church. And then it just became silent. 2 weeks after, nobody talked about it anymore. And Sarah talks about how she struggled for over 5 years trying to figure out how to heal from the situation and how to get through it. And there were so many different life factors that happened, and just how she struggled. And so one day she did a Google search again after trying several things on her own. It wasn't really what she needed. And she came across this program that was called Lost Team. She didn't know anything about it. She saw they were having a convention. It was in Fresno, I think. And so she gets a flight. She signs up. She goes to the door and says, I'm not registered to be here, but I just feel like I need to be here. And I said, come on in. And so Sarah found out she actually attended on the day that the Lost Team coordinators, the directors, were all meeting across the nation. She connected with somebody called Leslie Culver, who kind of guided her on, this is how you need to get this started in Amarillo. And Sarah said, this is what I needed. I've had friends that have lost people to suicide. This is what they needed, and how do I get this going? And so she met with, at the time, it was Sergeant Jason Riddlesberger, who was in charge of CIT. And he brought it to the Suicide Prevention Coalition and said, we need to do this. We got to figure out a way to do this. And so Sarah presented. I'm actually doing my internship for CIT to earn my master's, and so I'm in there. I know Sarah and all the struggles that she's been through also. And so we tried to get it off the ground, being volunteer run only, and then we realized this is a lot bigger than what our coalition can do. Amarillo Public Health was also a part of our coalition, a big supporter because they know our suicide rates, and I'll get into that also for Amarillo. And so along with Amy Horde, who is at Family Support Services, they wrote a grant through the House Bill 13 Act, and it was approved. And so the grant covers for our program supplies as well as my salary. That's it. Everything else is volunteer run. So there's 3 different components that come to that, that kind of in our making. So I talked a little bit about just kind of my history and everything, and there's a reason why I put this there. So I do have my Master's of Social Work. I did my CIT internship with over 600 hours of ride-alongs and experience in mental health. I remember when I interviewed for that internship, this really was my just like, I gotta do 3. I'm just gonna go for it. This one sounds interesting. I'm just gonna talk to this cop guy and see what he has to say. And so he's in there and he's like, what do you know about mental health? I said, absolutely nothing, but I'm willing to learn. And for some reason, he chose me as his intern. So I'm performing these ride-alongs. I really know nothing, and I saw a different side of mental illness, mental health, a different side of police than what I could have ever imagined. And so it was really life-changing for me. I also serve on the Amarillo Area Suicide Review Team. And this has come because our suicide numbers are so high in Amarillo that we actually have a coalition of professionals that come together, and we look at cases that have happened within the past year or 2 years, and we're trying to find out, is there any commonality between anything? Is there anything policy-wise that we can change? Is there anything that we can get out for education in the community so that we can try and reduce these numbers? And so I was actually involved with this officer's second to last, now it's Sergeant Hernandez, and we would actually go to the home of people that had lost somebody to suicide a year later and just hear their story. And it was really impactful. I'm also part of the coalition. I was hosting a group facilitated for Open Healing Place, which is a grief center here in Amarillo. I was here as a director administrator for Amarillo Children's Home now over a year ago. So Dana's position, basically. It's changed quite a bit. I am certified in mental health first aid, the ASSIST training, which is absolutely amazing. And that goes more into detail of if you are a professional, a service provider, and you have somebody that is at immediate risk for suicide, as in they are in the process of an attempt, how to kind of work with them and it's basically a de-escalation tool. It's a SAMA for suicide, basically. And on the Panhandle Behavioral Health Alliance, we're force member, and I'm a first responder wife. It's not these guys, but like I mentioned before, my husband's a firefighter. And when I present to the police officers, and this training is specifically for police officers, but I say, my husband doesn't have to tell me when he loses somebody, but I see how it affects him. And so it affects me also. And I see what mental health and suicide does and the impact that it has on our community. So just some facts about suicide. We've already talked about that too, but it's roughly 47,000 a year. I did change it to the third leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. It has lowered slightly, but again, we talked about how there's different populations that it has doubled over the time frame of recent years. So according to this ASAR report number, which is that suicide review team, in 2017, we had roughly 42 that were identified as a suicide. In 2019, this was pre-COVID, so before all of the isolation and all the things that you think would cause a huge impact on suicide, right? It jumped up to 63. For our population, Amarillo size, nationally, we should have roughly 20 a year. So we are 3 times higher than what the national average says. Potter, Randall County rank pregnancy, drug use, all this other things too. They're always high. Same thing for suicide. A loved one that's left behind after suicide are called survivors of suicide, or SOS. And sometimes that's confused with an attempt survivor. And so I want to make that very clear. When we're talking about our program, it is for people that have lost somebody to suicide. I often call them suicide grievers because that's kind of a little more clear as well. One suicide has an average exposure rate of about 135 people. That's the low end. So if you think about people that you've lost to suicide, this is, the church members, the neighbors, different school kids, depending on their, I feel like 135 people is pretty low actually when you think about people that need. Each suicide drastically affects 5 to 9 individuals. These are the best friend, the caregivers, the parents, the siblings, the husband, wife, children. These are the people that their life is forever changed by this instance. Again, that's on the low side. So suicide is just kind of a different grief. It's called a complicated grief. It has depression, anxiety, PTSD, and especially if they were the ones that had found their loved one. Severe life challenges, which we talked about, like the stay-at-home mom with the kids. All of a sudden they have to figure out, they're thrown into the situation and they have to figure out how to work with it. It often results in significant loss themselves. So maybe she had this, she's a stay-at-home mom, but she was really involved with the school or, something like that. And all of a sudden she can't do that anymore. And she's lost her friend group. And so that has different tolls on her. If it's something where you have a job that you absolutely love, maybe you can't work full-time anymore. If something was to happen to me, for instance, my husband wouldn't be able to be a firefighter anymore because nobody would be there to take care of the kids. And so there's a lot of significant life changes that you're just pretty much thrown into without expecting it. Survivors of suicide, it's okay. The main part of our program is survivors of suicide are 5 times more likely to die by suicide themselves. So that puts them 5 times more at risk than somebody that hasn't lost somebody to suicide. And that's where our program comes in, and that's why our prevention coalition that said we've got to do something about this, our numbers are way too high. So what is LOSS Team? It stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. We respond on scene to assist the family members, friends, or anybody, a loved one that is there at that moment that they have just lost somebody to suicide. We talked about the funding piece. It is with that House Bill 13 grant. Everything is volunteer-based. We are a peer support program. It's composed of mental health professionals or people that are specifically trained in that suicide prevention, in the therapy and kind of grief support, as well as somebody that has lost somebody to suicide. And that's what makes our program so different and so incredible. I will tell you, I walk on scene and I'm working with the family, and I can talk to them about counseling, and I can talk to them about everything that our program has to offer. But then when Sarah's there and she says, I lost my son to suicide, our stories are different, but I just have a little glimpse of what you're going through. And all of a sudden they start opening up to her. How am I ever going to get over this? You know, is the church going to give them a proper service? And all these different questions. She might not have the answer, but she probably has the answer better than I would. We do have contracts with the public health, and we hold memorandums of understanding with all of the police departments. So we respond to Potter, Randall, Canyon, and APD cases. Talk about the peer support part. After we respond on to people, we do ask them, is it okay if we follow up with you in just a few weeks just to check on you? If we get to consent to that, I call them case management. That's very clinical. But basically what we do is we just do check-in calls with them. We have our survivor volunteers that responded on scene, me, whoever it is, to just say, hey, I was just thinking about you today. I just wanted to check in and see if there's anything I can do for you. We leave it at that. Sometimes it's just to be that listening ear for somebody. Sometimes they're ready for resources. And so we're just there for them to meet them wherever they need. So how it works, there is an active response. We respond Sunday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. And that is where we actually have a team that is on call. And so we go out, like I said, and respond to the scenes when that situation has happened. I'm not going to go over all of this because, again, this is for police, but I just wanted to basically say that the police officer, they do an investigation, make sure that it is a suicide, because the number one thing they want families to know that if somebody has done this to your loved one, they want to know that. They want to answer as many questions as possible. And so I will say, we had a training with the detectives with the homicide unit, and they went through from start to finish, and it is a very, very thorough investigation. They're very hesitant to call it a suicide if it is not. We arrive on scene, we talk to the officer, we just ensure that we're not going to be there to tell the family that anybody has passed away. We're not walking into a scene if they don't want us to be there. We ask consent from the family to talk to them, all of that. And basically we just approach and say, we're just here to support you in any way we can. Do you have any questions or anything we can help you with right now? The whole point of that is because many of the suicide survivors that I work with on our volunteer team, they specifically remember on scene, police were inside their home. They had no idea what was going on. They knew something was going on. They knew that their child, their parent, whatever had died, but they didn't understand why they couldn't go in their home. They didn't understand why police were asking them all these questions. They didn't understand why they were checking for powder on their hands and acting as if they were a criminal in this case. They didn't understand any of this, and they were left outside for hours and nobody was talking to them. And they had no idea. First off, they're in shock. And second, they had nobody there to really support them through that process. And so that's what we are. We're just there to support them in any way they can. And it may even be, you've been up since 3 in the morning. Can I get you a bottle of water? It could be something as simple as, I know your dog's barking at us like crazy. Can I put them on a leash and just take them out and walk them for a little bit? It doesn't have to be so clinical and task-oriented. We're just trying to be their brain for them as much as possible and to just be there as support. Like I said, we do want to ask them do you have a safe person that you can stay with tonight? Specifically, I know that there was a case where this woman was a caregiver, and she just lost this, and she knew she was going to have to go pick up her kids from school soon, and she was just so concerned of how am I supposed to continue being mom after this has just happened. And so we helped her identify, hey, what about your parents? Are your parents close by that they could come in and just help with meals tonight and just help with getting your kids ready? This is a lot for you to go through right now. And that was exactly what she needed at the time. For somebody else, she was so distraught. She's like, I'm on call. Hey, is there a coworker you can just ask to pick up on call right now for you? And so it's those things that you might not think of when you're in that moment, and it's just like, I'm an emotional wreck, yet I know I have all this responsibility. And basically just being an outsider to tell them it's okay to ask for help. How can we help you do this? And then again, we follow up with them. We give them our phone number. If they don't want to speak to us on scene, that's okay too. We say that's fine. Here's my card. It's the last 2 phone number. You can call us anytime that you need us. And we just leave it at that. We're not pushy about it. But we will follow up with them. And that 2-week phone call, it's usually more, do you have any questions as far as the financial piece, the kind of the more task-oriented things that have to be done after somebody passes away. Later on, usually 3 months and over, that's when they start to call and say, I really thought after the funeral I was going to be over this. I'm still not. I need help. And that's when we start talking about different resources that are already here in the community. So one thing that we do provide is a resource finder. And I talked about being their brain for them on scene. When you're in that traumatic experience, you don't think about all these different easy things that you normally would. So for instance, police officers are there giving you business cards that have the case numbers on it. Or there's neighbors that you might not talk to so often, and so now they're handing phone numbers to you, or, call me so I can help you with meals. I want to set up a meal train, or there's lots of people that come on scene wanting to help, but they just don't know what's needed at that time. And so for our binder, we figured out, let's put a pencil bag in there. We just tell them, look, shove everything in there possible, open this binder just whenever you need it. In our binder, there's resources in there as far as scene restoration information. When I was doing those suicide review interviews with Hernandez, one thing I asked him, I said, okay, so this was a gunshot incident in the home. Who works with the scene? And he's like, we don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I asked Jacob, my husband, I said, okay, you're a firefighter. I know you come to scene too. So do you help with that? He said, if it's not a viable situation, we don't even respond. And so for me, it was a shock moment if I realized it's the family, it's the loved ones that after the police leave, what do? And so a lot of times they are the ones to help with scene restorations. They will ask a friend to do it. There are companies that do scene restoration, but it's costly. The cheapest quote, and I won't go into details, but the cheapest quote I found was $1,500. Home insurance may not cover. It's about 50-50 depending on the policy, but a lot of times you have to meet your deductible first. And so if you weren't expecting for funeral expenses and all this other things, $1,500 is a lot. So a lot of times they do it themselves, or they ask family, friends, neighbors, somebody else to do it, and that's causing trauma. And so we put in there one thing too that one of our volunteers said is, I just didn't even know what to search on Google. Like the words escaped me of how do I find who does this? And so we put specific language in there and companies that are specific to suicide. And that also kind of can work a deal with you as well. We do have some grant funding for counseling services so that can be offered to people who don't have behavioral health insurance, and also to help with scene restoration. And so that way we don't want people to have to do this. So that's in there. Just letting them know too that you have a choice of funeral home and cremation services. So it may be that the police have called a specific person to come and to help with the loved one, but you don't have to use them. If you have somebody else that you prefer, those are options there also. we put a checklist of necessary steps after I left on dice. One person said, you know, it had been 2 months and I didn't realize that I was supposed to call the Social Security office and let them know that this person had passed away. And then when I tried to receive money from my husband, they were questioning why I didn't call. So she said, I just didn't know. And there's so many things that you have to think of. There was another case that we helped. It was a mom who was stay at home and husband worked and everything. And she talked about, I didn't pay any of the bills. I don't have any passwords to I don't know bank account numbers. Like I know nothing. How am I supposed to pay my home mortgage right now? And so for us, it was specific help in with those situations. If it's a veteran, the paperwork is extensive. And so connecting them with the BRC, the Veterans Resource Center, to let them know, hey, they will go through the paperwork with you and help you file for these benefits. And so there's just so much that you're kind of thrown into and you feel so alone and confused along with being sad. You don't know what to do and where to go for help. And so basically that's what our binder is. We do have in there emergency mental health hotlines and resources. We talk about counseling and grief support options. One thing that was really helpful is we heard from our 20 survivors that serve on our team say, what got you through this? What were some resources, books that helped you? And so they gave me a list of everything that they read or anything that they used that was helpful. And we put that in there. One of the biggest questions I get, it's always, how did I not see this coming? Why would this happen? And how am I supposed to tell the kids? And so we have specific articles that address all of this in there. There is a delayed response too. So one thing that I wanted to make sure is that if somebody was to call the loss team and they said, I lost somebody over a year ago, I wasn't gonna be like, well, sorry, we can't help you. So we implemented a delayed response as well. And so if you know somebody that has lost someone at any time frame and they haven't been able to have grief support for a suicide loss, call me, please. If it's a friend of yours, I won't be able to talk specifically to you, but I can let you know some resources that you can pass on, or you can pass on our phone number. And so I just want to help as many people as possible. One thing also is that we are not a 24/7 response team. Many of again, we are all volunteer-based besides me. So I'm on call 24/7. I go and respond with an officer in the middle of the night. Fortunately, we don't have as many that happen during the nighttime. But I wanted to be very protective of my volunteers, and they work full time. And so if we don't have a team that's available to go out, we tell them, I'm sorry, I don't have anyone available right now, but we will follow up with the family as soon as possible. And so that is called delayed as well. So how are you helping survivors of suicide? And I've talked a lot about this too in different scenarios, but the model is actually based by Dr. Frank Campbell. And Frank is a survivor as well. And he started his research in the 90s in the Baton Rouge area. And so he found that based on his research, people that have lost somebody to suicide typically reach out for support within 4.5 years after losing somebody to suicide. Now, we just talked about everything that can happen in 4.5 years, right? And all the different life changes. And so that's a long time to wait. With this program, Frank found that people were reaching out for counseling or different services less than 4.5 months after a suicide loss. So people are seeking healthy coping skills, grief support in a very, very short amount of time frame. I will say for us, it's been less than 39 days for most of them. And so within months, we're assisting people with some grief support. We do offer support from someone who has gone through a similar loss and made it through. So I like to say a positive example of resiliency. One thing that was really impactful that one of our SOS volunteers said is she was sitting in a support group and she looked to the woman and said, she lost her daughter 5 years ago. I can make it to 5 years too. And so just having that positive example of, okay, they got through this, how did they do it? Maybe it's important for me too. We do provide connection and relationship to meet their unique grief and resource needs. So like I talked about, there's been cases that they're not interested in counseling. That's not what they want. They have no need for that, or support groups like people groups. That's not what they want. That's not going to fit their need. One case specifically, I was speaking with a 16-year-old that had lost a really good friend, and she was doing online school and all that other stuff. And so we tried to say, well, you know, what would you think about, you know, there's some groups that you can go to. And she's like, no, I hate people. Okay. Well, how about an individual counselor? You know, it could just be you and one other person. She said, I don't trust anybody. There's no way I'm going to go talk to somebody, a counselor. Said, okay, do you have a Facebook? And she's like, yeah, I got Facebook, but I'm dated now. Even in a year, I need to change it to like Instagram or something. I don't know, that's even dated. But I said, you know, that there's support groups online, even on Facebook. You can basically be anonymous. You can never actually talk to somebody, but you can just tell your story. And so she was like, all right, I'll check it out. And so I talked to her a few months later and asked her how she's doing and everything. And she talked about a couple of people that she interacts with on the Facebook group, and she read a couple of specific posts that were really meaningful, and so she printed those out. And so when I said, hey, is it okay if I follow up with you? She's like, you know, I feel like I'm doing pretty well, thank you. That was all she needed, somebody to just hear her story in a virtual way. And it may be that they just need something for that task base. You know, how am I'm good support-wise and everything. I just need to know how to fill out this paperwork. Hey, I'll get you connected with somebody to do that. And so we don't judge people and what they need. We don't tell them how to grieve. We just let them know that we're here when they need it. We do use it as an Ask an Expert for resources. I say it's more confident than Googling. So when I was trying to look for a counselor, I had all these names filled up, right, of all these available options and everything. You think I just started calling one by one based on the list? No, I was asking my friends, hey, do you know of anybody on this list? Have you heard anything? I was asking them what worked for you. And that's exactly what a lot of our recent survivors want to do with our peer support survivors. Hey, there's this place called Hope and Healing Place. I really don't know much about it. Can you, like, what is a support group? Like, what does that even look like? And say, hey, it's more based on art therapy. This is how you sit. It's roughly this many people. These are the topics that they talk about, all that stuff. That seems a lot better to, well, I just signed up to go to this bereavement center for groups, and you don't know anything about it. They may be eligible for counseling and scene restoration, financial assistance. I talked about that lost teen grant funding that we have. That was something that when I was starting this program, we had all these awesome information and available everything, but if somebody couldn't afford counseling, it was just like, I'm giving you this notebook, but I'm giving you those options that aren't available. And so I didn't like that. So we wrote for some grants, and we had that put into place for us. One thing that I wasn't really expecting to come of this, but I have a lot of people that say my friend just lost somebody to suicide, and I just don't know what to do for them. I remember being on scene for one case, and there was a neighbor, and you can tell he was really concerned, and he walked up to us, and he said, did so-and-so pass away? I said, yes, sir, he did. And he was like, man, it's like, just what can I do for the wife? What can I do to help? And I was like, well, how did you know them? And we started getting into the relationship, and he mentioned that they would pay him to mow his lawn for every 2 weeks. I was like, would you mind just picking that up for a while and just helping me so that she didn't have to worry about that? It's like, yeah, I can do that. Another thing is sometimes meal trains are wonderful. Meal trains, I'll say, are good. But people that just randomly bring casserole after casserole after casserole, If you've ever been in that situation where your whole freezer's full and you're like, I don't even know what to do with all this food, sometimes it becomes more stressful. So I love to say, DoorDash is a really good option. So a gift card for all these different places that they might use right now if needed, but they may not. My go-to is to provide paper goods, because when you have a ton of family coming in for a funeral service, and the last thing that person wants to do is dishes for 23 people. Instead say, hey, here's just some paper goods, just throw it away, then you don't have to worry about it. So those are just some options of things that we give people ideas about what to help. And it could even be, I've had people say, I didn't want to talk about, that George had died, or I don't want to upset her. And so just kind of walking through, you don't think she thinks about him every day already. Like, she'd probably love to hear his name. So different things like that. So how are we helping police in the community? Again, we're just helping them through the step-by-step process. So they're on the inside, they're dealing with their investigation. They have this whole list of things that they have to get done while on scene. And so many times they are so police focused because they have a job, and it really is a protective factor for them, or method for them. Losing somebody and seeing all these different tragedies over and over and over again can wear on you. And so that's kind of a defense mechanism that they put up. So I say, let us be the teddy bear that the families can hold on to. I've been on scene where the police have been inside, the family's been outside, and they are wailing on the floor on their knees. And the only thing I can do is just get on my knees too and just pat them back. I didn't do anything for 30 minutes, but just to be there and just to witness their grief. And after, when we were about to leave, another family started showing up, and just said thank you for that. So just being there to support them. And I have heard from several police officers, they're like, this is what I've needed for a long time. Like, this is the support, because it's really hard to be that mental health professional and police officer all at once. So prevention of the suicide contagion effect and future mental health crime-related calls. This is Jody when I said, hey, I'm going to talk about this in a minute. I don't remember what you had said, but it was something about it. But the contagion effect basically is when a suicide occurs, a lot of times it really hurts so many other people, and especially in kids, that there's a lot of, I don't want to sound cold, but a lot of copycats that happen afterwards, right? And so John is actually going to be provided with a resource finder, and there's a specific guide on if there is a loss of a young person, kind of how to help handle those situations, how to talk about it, so that it doesn't glorify this person that was lost, but it's a very fine line between memorializing and just showing that, yeah, this person was lost and it's really sad. And so there's just a guide basically on how to handle specific situations like that. When it comes to suicide, giving full details, I have grown to hate the media, and I feel Amarillo's is much better, and they're more sensitive to it. But you know, when they put specifics all about Robin Williams and all these famous people that people look up to and how they did it and all this other stuff, like, that's not okay. First off, you know, respect privacy of the family, which is a lot of times when you have somebody call and they have, here, I'm just going to give you my friend's number. Can you please call them? I can't do that because I want to respect your friend, and they might not want us to call. But if your friend calls us, I'd be more than happy to talk to them. So it's like that. There was something specific about that you mentioned. I don't remember what it was now. Yes, 13 reasons. And that was exactly it. So they actually saw, and when they were making this movie, there's a full coalition, like nationwide, that is for like the media and trying to stop things to put attention on suicide in a negative way. And with that 13 reasons why, they warned and warned and warned. They tried to stop it, and they actually saw a big increase in suicides after that documentary came out. So again, yes, we need to talk about suicide, but we need to talk about it in a gentle way that is not giving people ideas or letting them fantasize about, you know, what has happened and things like that. That was it. Thank you. And then just with the future crime-related law enforcement calls, drug addiction, alcohol use, it's a spiraling effect that happens. And so if we can get people coping skills that are healthy immediately so that they don't turn to just the easiest thing that is kind of socially acceptable, the better we are. And that way we can try and intervene and keep their life as stable as possible. So we are giving them connection engagement with current resources that are already established. People don't know that family support services, that we have counselors there that are available. They're very good counselors. And a lot of them serve actually on the LOTS team as mental health professionals. So they have specific training and they've heard stories of suicide survivors and they have a different insight to it. Hope and Healing Place, people don't know that this is a free bereavement center that is established. It's been established and it's the only place for kids right now. It's a bereavement center. It's a wonderful, I love it. It's a wonderful place. La Esperanza is specific to Spanish-speaking grief support. And then DSA Hospice has a grief and loss series that people didn't know. Well, my person didn't die in hospice care, so I can't attend these. That's not the case. They have some for COVID loss. They have even one for pet loss. And so it's just basically support groups, again, free of charge that you can attend and just feel connected that there's things here. You just need to know how to get to them. We talked about kind of the holes with scene restoration. With suicide-specific peer support groups, there was only one forum that was specific to suicide, and it is at Hope and Healing Place. It's a closed group though, and you have to wait a specific amount of time before you can join. So these people that, you know, a month out, you're like, I just got to talk to somebody about this. They weren't eligible to join those groups just yet. And that was a hole in our community. That was something that we worked with Hope and Healing Place to solve that problem. We want to reach people when they are reaching out for help. Again, just suicide-specific training. So I graduated with my degree, and I have grief support groups that I was leading through Hope and Healing Place, and I knew of Aaron's loss, and I really felt like I've got everything I need to help somebody. And then when I started working with our volunteers, I sat in the room and I remember thinking, I've never experienced that. I've never thought about that. And so we need suicide-specific training, just like you're doing today. We need to know how to help somebody if they come to you and what to say to them, instead of just saying, oh, I hope somebody else picks that up that knows what they're doing. That's not my responsibility. I did want to point out too that when I talked about the support group, we actually started a suicide griever support group. It is the second Tuesday of every month. It is led by our suicide survivors. The only person that is in there that is not a suicide survivor is somebody to represent the agency. So it really is just a safe place for anybody that has lost somebody to suicide at any time frame. So I do have some flyers here if you feel like that's something that you'd be interested in. You can pass on to a friend to attend. We don't require RSVP. It's an open group. So if you feel like you need it this month, and then next month you feel like you're doing okay and you don't want to go, that's okay too. And so it's a little different than how the closed group works with the community place. It is for 17 and older. If you have somebody younger than that, let's talk about it to see if they'd be a good fit or if there's another support group that we can get them in. I'm going to end with, this is my contact information. I do have some flyers that talk about LOTS team. I will say that over a time frame, since December, our starting time, we have served over 150 clients. And these are people that we've actually made contact and helped with support. It's needed. It's something that our community really just needed. I don't know what else to say about it. In Texas now, there's 3 other lost teams, so we're the 4th one to start. There's only 50 across the nation. If you know somebody that would be interested in volunteering, again, there's other ways, even if it's not as specific to the response team part. One thing, I am very, very protective of my volunteers, and so the crisis line calls me, and they let me know kind of the case description, if you will, or what's going on, and that way I can judge whether our volunteers are okay to go out. There's been times where we've had a younger person that was a male, and so I asked Sarah, this is the situation, or do you feel comfortable going out? She said yes, and so we did respond together, but I was never going to send her out to something that she was going to be activated and re-traumatized. I always tell them to, hey, if this is a really bad month because this is a month you lost to somebody, you don't have to pick up. It's okay. We have established on there a pre-briefing, which is what I talk about, where we give details about the case so that they know kind of what to expect. I do not want them to see the body as much as possible. Sometimes we can't help it depending on the situation, but if I can protect them from that as much as possible, I will. And then I have a mandatory debriefing afterwards. So after they leave the scene, they have to debrief with their partner. They always go a team of 2. They have to talk about their cases. They also have to call me to talk about that and see if there's anything. And then we have it set up as well that there is a counselor that is specifically volunteering for trauma afterwards. I've used it before. I won't go into detail, but I had a case that had happened quite a while before we responded, and so I was having this smell that I could not get out of my head, and it was waking me up at night. I couldn't eat, and it was really intense, and so I actually had to meet with her and do some trauma work afterwards. So I'm good now. We do support our volunteers in every way. We offer training, community. That sounds really serious, but we actually have a lot of fun together. What questions do you guys have as far as the lost team and post-vention? It's a long training.
Yeah, so I just want to, Jennifer's aware of Josh and everything that happened there. And so I just wanted to open the floor for a brief, anything that anybody wants to share about that situation. I know many of you were able to attend Josh's funeral service yesterday. How are you processing? How are you dealing with that? What even resources do you need? I know for myself, I didn't live with Josh. I didn't live with his siblings. But just the fact that one of our kids felt that way, he did what he did, took his own life, it's hard. It's something you want to push out of your mind, and this may be one of the things that you deal with survivors. It's something you want to push out of your mind, but it's hard to. And so, kind of wrestling with those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts. Anybody want to share?
Pastor really did a good job yesterday of saying to the kids that were there, and maybe not because the adults too, that they have purpose, and that it's really important that we can see it. Because I could see a kid copycat just because all these great things are said about him, and I could see a kid saying, I want good things said about me too. But I think that it was there that he said, you have purpose, and this death shows you that it's by the word. That's what it shows you, not that you have purpose now, you have purpose to live, and that's what you need to focus on is that. So I thought that was really, really valuable and really good.
Did your kids, I know you had some of your kids there. Did
Yeah. I had one that decided not to go, and the 3 that went, represents the shelter. Like, so they view Josh, right, quite a bit. There was one that said she didn't want to get her filled, so I probably more worried about that one. But the other two were, you're okay, I think. And I don't know if they have lived with Marlena, but, like, in our home, they did know him well because they were in shelter.
Anyone else? You sure?